exactly what we're talking about. And if you really step backwards and think about it, if you think about humans back when we lived in caves, if you were constantly getting chased by a bear and the bear wanted to eat you and your family, your focus quickly goes from, all these things that you want to do to where is the bear? Is the bear coming? Is it nearby? Do I have enough weapons to get rid of the bear? Who's the bear going to come after? So you get this tunnel vision. And we do the same thing when we get into this busyness paradox. There's a study that shows we lose up to 13 to 14 IQ points while we're stuck in this paradox. And that's really interesting because the average IQ is something around 109 or 110, depending on how you look at it. And so that's about a 10% plus drop. So that's very significant. And if you think about it, if you're an executive in a company, especially in a startup, and you want your people to think broadly and be able to think outside the box, you definitely want to keep them out of this paradox. And so I found a really good quote on Twitter that I wanted to share. And Dave Anderson says, burnout should be eligible for workers' comp, but that will require a shift towards accepting that mental injuries are a thing that employers are on the hook for. So if you stop and think about that for a second, with the last comment I gave you about, if you're an executive in a startup, you don't want people to get stuck in the busyness paradox. This is kind of going in the same direction. Is it saying, well, wait a minute, if a business causes their people to be burned out, and that is a known medical condition, would they be eligible for workers' comp in these type of situations? And that could change the way executives look at this entirely. And so when I've talked to people about this before, they were like, well, how do I know if I'm burned out? So there's three strategies that were listed, or three stages rather, that were listed in an article in EMS World that was focused on emergency medical providers out in the field and the challenges that they have. And these are the three stages that they went through. And it's very oddly similar to what I've seen in IT. And the first off is emotional exhaustion. And that's where you start picking up that negative attitude. Your first approach is to be very cynical with something. A customer says, if you work in support, let's say a customer says, oh, I was using this and it didn't work. Your first thought is like, oh, customer, what did you do? Rather than, oh man, like, let's get to the bottom of it. You also go home feeling physically and mentally exhausted. There's a difference between doing a great job at work and moving the needle, and then coming home and being tired because you've really done something amazing during the day. But there's nothing to come home and just be completely exhausted and not know where to start the next day. And that's the first stage. The second stage they call depersonalization, and that's where you really start hammering on that people deserve what they got. That's where, if a customer says, hey, I used your software and it broke, and it's like, well, you didn't use it right, or, you didn't read the manual or something like that. You see this a lot in Linux forums of various types. And you start to subvert other people and dehumanize them. And dehumanizing is more of, using offensive, like dark humor to make people not be humans, turning customers into, coworkers into animals and things like that with the way that you talk about them. It can really get into a bad spot. And the last part is where you just lose all satisfaction and feeling of accomplishment. So you got no love for the work, no love for the workers. You just hate being at the workplace, and you just feel like you're stagnant. And so when I mean stagnant, I mean stagnant in your career. Like you feel like you're not moving ahead. Maybe you're going backwards, or you're just staying in the same place every day. This is where I think of the fellow in Office Space that's just like, I'm just not going to go to work anymore. That guy was completely burned out. He'd gone all the way to stage 3, and he had no love for anything at the office. But somehow he went through this like sinusoidal thing where he came up on the other side and felt great. So I don't know. I don't have that included in the presentation, but that's a good movie to watch if you want to use that method as well. And so the next part we get to is we say, okay, well, if we know how to identify it, how do we come back out of it? And so there's a few different ways. But the most important thing to remember, and I love this sign, where it says, never in the history of calm down has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down. And what I'm getting at here is that you can't simply tell someone to stop feeling burned out, or you can't simply tell someone, hey, well, you've got a great job. Why are you complaining? I don't have a job. It doesn't matter. Like, this is still a problem that you have to deal with. A speaker that I heard one time says, you cannot take away someone's experience. If someone has an experience and the experience is terrible, you can't say they didn't experience that. You can't say they had those feelings. So in essence, you have to find out the source of the burnout to get rid of it. Now I want to go to this ice cream place and find that sign. So to start coming out of this, you have to start embracing constructive behaviors. And so I put both of these up here. I hate putting bullets on slides, but I think it's nice to compare and contrast the left and right side. So on the constructive side, you want to share your feelings with people in some way. For some people, they love transforming them into like just tangible things. Sometimes it's memes. I don't know if everyone's had office memes inside their own office and things like that. For some people, it helps to write about it, whether it's a blog post or strongly worded email. I don't generally recommend those. And take time off, but I'll talk about that in detail in a little bit. But it all comes around to having those healthy interactions with other people and being able to talk openly. On the destructive side, you want to avoid anything that changes who you are or puts barriers up between you and people who could potentially help you. So you also have to make sure to never give in to the suffering and never believe that you deserve to be burned out. Never feel like, oh, well, I got this amazing job and they're paying me a ton of cash. And so, I just asked for it. I'm just going to have to work through it. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to find a change within your work. And we'll go through that next. And so the 3 paths to recovery that I've come up with on my own and have used in the past are pretty simple. Get in, get up, and get out. And so I'll go through what each one of these mean. So for get in, we're talking about this is where you recommit to your work. This is where you say, you know what? I love this job. There's things about it that I don't like. I want to find a way to make it work. And this, I'm going to change who I am and tell people that I'm going to change who I am so that I can get on a better footing at my work. And so this one is really successful when you enjoy what you do and you enjoy your coworkers, but you're burned out. And if you've ever felt yourself saying, when someone says, well, why don't you just leave? And you're like, man, I love the people. Or they got that coffee in the break room that's just super tasty. Or there's just something like that. If you find yourself saying that, you've still got love for the work and the people and the workplace. And this might be a really good time to recommit. And so this is when you talk honestly with your manager and you say, hey, look, I'm burned out. And I'm burned out because, and start trying to find those ways of like, man, if I had more control over what work we do and what work we don't do, or if I had more control over the customer experience in these ways, these specific ways, that starts to change the narrative with your manager. And they may say, oh, wow, then that's something we can work on. As an example, in my past, I was very frustrated with how work was allocated between people. And I said, would you mind if before we planned our next sprint, if I could get our tickets in order and make sure that they all contain the right information so everyone knows what to do as soon as they look at the ticket? And my boss looks at me and was like, that's the job of a project manager. And I'm like, just let me do it. And he said, absolutely, just go ahead. And it helped me out quite a bit. And the last part, I'm terrible at this, but find ways to be more open with your problems before it becomes a big source of stress. So before it explodes and overflows, find a way to talk about it sooner in a concrete way. And so this will work for some people in some situations. In other situations, you do what I call get up. And this is where you take a break. But this is not just taking time off. This is taking a concerted effort to take a break. And I'll explain what that is here in a second. So this is when you enjoy some of what you do, but you don't feel fulfilled, or maybe you're stuck in that busyness paradox that we talked about before, where you're so busy that you just got tunnel vision on a certain thing. And what you do with this is you take real time off and do something you enjoy. That's the critical part. When I say real time off, I mean, you don't go home and just sit on the sofa and eat popcorn and watch TV, because then you'll start thinking about work. You'll pick up the phone, you'll see the work people emailing back and forth, and you'll get pulled right back in. And you have to do something you enjoy. Someone came up after the Texas Linux Fest talk and was like, I really love to do these things, but my family hates it. And I said, well, the point is to do something you enjoy. And he's like, well, then I'd have to leave my family behind, and go do this trip. And I'm like, well, that may be what you need to do. For some people, you just need to be on your own, or you need to go and do something that you enjoy that maybe your family doesn't do. As I said before, don't do nothing. Think about the work that makes your soul feel good. And as you're doing that, think about other roles that are up, down, or sideways to get on a better path. Oddly, I've seen people deal with burnout and then become a manager and find that they get more control and more autonomy over what the group is doing, and the burnout starts to go away. That's a little bit of an unusual one, but you may find that there's other positions within the company that make sense or will allow you to do, work that makes you feel more fulfilled and accomplished. All right, so those two are down. The last one is kind of the nuclear option, and that's where we talk about get out. You notice I'm not saying quit here. I'm not saying resign. I'm saying leave your job behind. And so when I say leave your job behind, I mean, you leave all of it behind. You say, hey, you know what? I had good times. I had bad times. But this, I'm cutting everything. Not only am I not going to get a paycheck anymore, but I'm going to let bygones be bygones and say, there's things that didn't work and I'm just going to leave that behind. And so this works really well if you don't want to keep doing the same work that you do for your company, maybe for someone else, or maybe you disagree with the company's direction, or if your coworkers have made a hostile work environment. It's really hard to repair a hostile work environment successfully. So that could be one of those situations where you say, look, the only option I have is to leave. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you have your finances in check. Like, know how much runway you have before you need to get another job or something temporary. And take some time off between the jobs to detach. Make sure you're fully prepared to leave that job behind, not just quit. Find some friends that do what you like at other companies. It doesn't really have to be that you care about the company that they work for, but if you love, let's say, writing Python, and you have a friend of yours that just loves writing Python, he writes blog posts about it and all that, go to them and say, hey, what do you love about your job, or what about your job is good? And you may find they have techniques to deal with burnout in their work, or their company is a good place to work for. And the last thing, most important, don't burn bridges, don't rage quit, don't scorch the earth or leave abruptly. You'll need those connections later. You would much rather have your boss from your previous job say, hey, you know what? This person did great work for us. They kind of got in a rut and got stuck, and they made sure we were in a good place, and then they left, and we would be happy to have them back one day. Instead of someone's like, no, this guy got mad, threw his laptop across the room and jumped out a window, got in his car and drove off. You definitely don't want those kind of recommendations coming through. So if you don't remember anything from the talk, at least remember this part. The only way out of an interpersonal problem is through help from other people. You absolutely 100% cannot solve it by yourself. You've got to be able to be open with other people, share your problems and share your challenges, and let them help you dig out of that situation. Their feedback will be critical in you getting out. And you have to keep the lines of communication honest and keep the lines of communication open. If you're burned out because you don't like your paycheck, you've got to be able to go to your manager and say, look, I love working here, but I don't make enough money. Or if you love what you do, but you wish you got sent on more travel, don't be embarrassed about that. Be honest. A lot of people are very embarrassed to say they're burned out because of salary. Go and be completely honest with that. If your boss says, well, there's nothing I can do about salary, then hey, at least you got your answer. So when we're talking about the recovery part of this, people in a lab subjected rats, and there's a link to the story here if you'd like to read the full thing. It's very long. So they subjected rats to chronic stress. Now, I don't really know how you give a rat chronic stress, and I'm not really entirely sure I want to know. But they stressed these rats out for an extended period, and then they recovered. They noticed the rats completely recovered after 4 weeks of rest and relaxation. So these rats got to the point where all they focused on doing was just eating and protecting themselves, eating and protecting themselves. And that's all they did. After 4 weeks of rest and relaxation, I'm not sure if they played soft music or gave them great food or how that exactly worked. They found the rats went back to their normal inquisitive selves, and they wanted to play games and go through mazes and look for food. Then they did the same study with medical students. They didn't put the medical students in a cage, but what they did was they grabbed a set of medical students who were just about to take their board exams, which is a huge deal if you're trying to become a doctor, and then some first-year students, and found that the medical students that were just about to take their exams, there's a certain part of the brain where they found all these neural connections were dismantled, like the brain had taken them apart. Then they waited 4 weeks after the exam, went and talked to these students again, and had them undergo more brain scans, and found that almost all the neural connections had been put back together. So humans and rats can do it in 4 weeks or less. And so I'll end on a quote from Jessie Frazell, one of my favorite people on the planet. She's talked a lot about burnout on Twitter. And one thing she said was coming back from burnout is weird. Every day you're like, this is me at 100% and I feel awesome. The next day, no, wait, this is me at 100%. I feel even better. And the day after, now I'm 120%. And she goes on to say, I have this theory that burnout recovery is 25% the time it took to get burned out. So the key thing is here, be honest early, and just know that burnout is not the end. It's just the bridge to what's next. And thanks.
So thank you so much for that. We've had a lot of conversation going through the RC channel that I'm going to try to bring the questions to you. And guys, if you're in the Mumble room, please feel free to jump in, ask your questions, tell us kind of your viewpoint on this. I think that's important. You know, everybody's journey is different. And so kind of everybody's healing is different as well. I don't know if you would agree with that, Major Hayden.
For sure. Yeah, I think everyone deals with it differently. I think that some people are prone to burnout more often than others, and I think everyone recovers in their own way. And that's why I kind of gave those options there at the end so that people could weigh the ones that work out best for them.
So one of the questions I have for you is, it's going to be hard to phrase, so hopefully you'll bear with me, but it's a bit of a how question. And that's, you know, you talked about talking to your manager and possibly your team about what you're facing. And I know that that entails a bit of vulnerability that some people might not be comfortable with. You know, my team is on the line right now, so they can definitely talk about it. But I know that I think I missed I just went from 0 to 3, and I just went in and I'm like, I hate containers. I want nothing to do with them. I would just want to leave and raise goats. And that was how I just started the conversation with, I am done and I need something different. Obviously, that might not work for everyone else. So I was wondering if you might be able to give us some tips on how to broach the conversation with our team leads or our managers.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. You have to find a way to share your feelings. And I think the way you shared it was totally fine. I think you have to figure out, how to share it in an earlier way. And I'm not the best at that at all. But you have to find people that you trust. And I found sometimes it's a little bit easier if you get outside of the work setting. So in the past, what I've done is I've just gone to people and, I've said like, hey, can we go get lunch? And usually in my past work, like getting lunch was this group activity where everyone would argue about food for a while. But if I popped up and I was just like, dude, I got to go get some food. I want it to be greasy and let's go. Then someone's like, oh, geez. Okay. Like, yeah, let's go talk. You have to find people that you trust and be able to share your feelings with them in a way that's honest and open. Even if the issues you have are with them, sometimes you may have an issue with a person directly and that's causing your burnout. And sometimes getting outside the office and talking with them and just saying, man, like when you do that thing or whatever, or when you support this thing that the team doesn't want to do, it's really frustrating. And sorry, that's a really roundabout answer, but I don't know. I think what I get back to is just be honest and be honest early.
Well, did somebody else want to say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Peter. I actually have done a lot of work. My background is I was a mental health counselor working in the foster care system, and then I worked in IT for about 7 years. One of the key kind of difficulties when talking about burnout is having that conversation. And I actually did have this conversation with my manager, and it went fairly well. But when I talked with a lot of other people about it, I heard all kinds of stories ranging from, I was dealing with burnout. I was dealing with, some other depression that was feeding into the burnout. My manager understood. They gave me a week off. It was great. There's been other scenarios where it has not gone as well. And I think the really key part is to kind of read the room, read the office, understand what the mental health culture is there. Because very often, especially with kind of these rock star jobs where they want 80-hour work weeks, they want you pedal to the metal the entire time, the mental health culture might not be really there, and it's a lot harder to have those conversations, unfortunately.
That's a really good point to make. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like you have to have a good read on what's going on in the office before you start sharing. And I think there's a flip side to that too, where I think you need to, especially as you have team meetings and things like that, have a read on other people in the team. Sometimes you'll notice people like, men will stop shaving, or people might wear clothes that are different from what they had before, or they may look more tired than they were before. Maybe that's a good time to step in and say, "Wow, okay, you look different than normal. What's going on?"
You're actually hitting on a really, really interesting point. One of the things that when I was working in foster care and I started looking at the symptoms of burnout there, because very often you'd have caseworkers who are spending 60 hours a week doing intensive work in a house where their lives were in danger. They're trying to keep the kid out of foster care, but the kid, has really violent urges. It's really bad. So one of the things that you kind of brought up was when you were working as an EMT, you would see the very end stages. And I think one thing that there aren't enough conversations about is existing mental health safeguards. So people don't know what their red flags are. Um, so when I started working in tech, I knew what my red flags are. If I was growing a neck beard, I'm not okay. I need to talk to my manager, take a day or two off. And I think we have entered this culture in tech where we just don't believe that's a thing. We don't see our red flags. And then next thing we know, we're working 80 hours a week. We haven't talked to our significant other, in a week, and we're just miserable. And we don't even see that we're the frog in the boiling water, so to say.
So let me throw in this question, and it's from Hawkins, or I guess it's more of a statement, but I'm going to phrase it in a question from Hawkins in the IRC room. And he talks about sometimes he's so burned out that even the slightest disagreement kind of makes him lose his cool within, his organization. What are some tips and advice that when we feel ourselves reaching that moment and we actually have the moment of clarity of like, I am upset about the way I feel, not about what this person has said, that we can put into play to kind of bring ourselves back down?
Oh man, yeah, that's I've seen it happen before as well, and usually it can be one of two things. Like I think one can be like what you're talking about, where you don't really have that moment of clarity. You're not really sure you're going down that path until you get there. Um, but I think the other side of it is that if the business or the team within the business is not allowing people to have an open dialogue about some of the things that are happening within the company, whether it's direction or where products are going or sales or something like that, then people feel like maybe they shouldn't say anything, and then by the time they can say something, it's something that they wish they could take back. It's the same thing I have with my kids, trying to get them to say what they're mad about before they just explode and throw something across the room.
Yeah.
Um,
Drifter just said that in the chat room. He goes, he feels that the longer he waits in order to be able to actually say something, the more that it builds up until they eventually just kind of explode.
right, and that's where you have to, you have to have some kind of support system within your group. Some kind of connection to your manager. Regular meeting with your manager. And frankly, the people have asked me this before, and they're like, "Well, I went to my boss and told him I was experiencing burnout, and here's the things that I want to change, and he told me to get lost." And I'm like, "Oh, well, then you totally should go find someplace else to work, because that's a pretty terrible situation to be in." And that's of course one of those options, but you have to find ways to bounce ideas off other people as well. Case in point, at my last job, I was very angry about the pricing we had for something. And I went to a buddy of mine. I was just like, "I can't believe this pricing is BS. Rah, rah, rah." And he took me aside and he was like, "Well, let me explain to you why it's like that." And he went through the whole thing, and I got out the other side of it and thought, wow, my gosh, I had no idea all this was going into it, and this is where the market is, and all. And so it really took me kind of blowing my top just to one person that I trusted, to then get the data that I needed to understand I was the one that was actually in the wrong.
So I'm going to put myself out there on this one. And just, I guess this is my personal question. And one of the things that I've dealt with is, so recently started studying security and kind of digging into it. And when I came into the same realization that you talked about needing to take some time off and to step away to really refresh, I just kept fretting that I was falling further and further behind and I was just losing time, which just kind of became a vicious cycle. Have you experienced something similar or any tips on how to break that cycle?
So when you say losing time, or you mean losing out on progress on your career, or what do you mean by
Yeah.
losing time?
Like if I take these, 3, 4 weeks, whatever week off, that's time that I could have been spending, working towards my certification or doing a capture the flag. And I'm going to forget things that I've already lost or I've already learned because I'm not using them.
That's
Right.
that's
Oh, go
actually
ahead.
something that's incredibly common, both with this current generation and the tech field, and it's just burnout culture. People have normalized being so frenetically busy that they don't have any time for self-care, any time for intentional self-care. They have this whole concept that, okay, self-care looks like, me hanging around my apartment in my sweats and drinking beer all day. When that's, no, that's depression. That is not a healthy outlet. Um there's actually one case where I had a friend who was working 80 hours a week. He had received this promotion. We had to force him out of his house to get him to go on a hike. And he couldn't imagine doing that. He's just like, no, I have to keep out of the server. I need to do this. And finally, once we got him out of connectivity, he started relaxing. I saw this transformation in him, but we literally had to drag him out of the house to do this. And it's because there's this culture that has us existing in this sort of panic state where we have to stay ahead of the competition. Otherwise, we will be unemployed, we will die, blah, blah, blah. And it's incredibly toxic. And people get stuck in this mindset, and it's very hard to break out of it.
That's a fantastic summary. Yeah, I'm doing my first remote job I've ever done right now, and a lot of times I eat lunch at the desk, while I'm pushing code or doing something like that. And my wife has jumped on me multiple times and it's just like, you need to go sit on the back porch, or you need to take me to lunch, or something like that. And so we started trying to improve on that and set a weekly time for something. And for some people, I think a cadence helps with that, like a forced cadence, like. I was in a role where we had a pretty tight knit team, and we would go and get tacos at this amazing taco place every Friday. And if anybody tried to duck out or something, now if there was an outage, that was different. We had to go figure out the outage. But if someone tried to duck out and they're like, "No, I'm just going to try and get this code done," or whatever, we went to their desk and like got right in their face and were like, "No, it's lunchtime," and we dragged them out to lunch. And so many times, I was that person that was being dragged, and I got to the point where I was like, "Thank you for dragging me away from my desk for a little bit. I didn't realize the value of doing this."
Last question I have for you, I think, and I'm kind of basing this on what Tim Tierney is talking about in the RC room, and that's on the manager end. What advice would you give to a manager who perhaps is, I don't want to say dealing with, but has somebody on their team that is going through this burnout cycle to be able to help, still have them do their position, their job, but be able to recover in an easier manner?
Right. So I think first off, as a manager, the absolute best thing is to catch it as early as you can. Like watch your people, and I don't mean watch their output and that kind of thing per se, but I mean watch them on conference calls. Like watch their demeanor. Like if you have a daily stand up, keep an eye out for certain things that don't make sense. Like if it normally looks like they've had a shower and now they're not having a shower, or normally they're very loud and excited on the conference call, and then most days they're like really slow. That's a great opportunity to hop into a one-on-one and just say, "Hey, I notice things are changing with you. Like, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help with?" If you got somebody that's kind of getting to the point where you either identify or someone else brings it to you that they're feeling very burned out, you have to find a way to be that person for them. So you have to find a way to just have those crucial conversations, which I think there's a training course called critical conversations, something like that, that helps you have those conversations with somebody where you don't come across as sounding like a parent or anything like that. You have to find a way to say, "Look, I like the skills that you have, and I like what you bring to the team." Now, those can't be empty comments. You have to be able to highlight those. I had a conversation with a person I was managing one time, She was in information security, extremely burned out. And I told her, I said, you know what I love the most about what you do? And she looked at me, she's like, what? And I said, you come in, you greet us all every morning. You ask us if we want to go get coffee. You're the first one to say, let's go meet with that group. You're the first one to just get us off our rear ends to go do something. And she looked at me and she's just like, no one has ever said anything to me like that before. And so sometimes you have to really sit down and say, what are the things I really value about this person that I would hate to lose, and make sure they know it. Because sometimes that can really help someone dig out of a rut.
I guess we need to start wrapping things up to give the room back to our friends at Linux Unplugged, or yeah, I almost forgot the name of the podcast, and I'm quite often on it. How embarrassing is that?
Hey, it happened.
But I did want to ask if you had any final resources that you'd be able to share with people if they wanted further information. I'll plug two of my favorite, which is OS Mental Health Illness, open sourcing mental health illness issues, and Hackers Mental Health. I think these are two great organizations you can find on Twitter. Any others that you know about?
Oh, no. The first one that you listed was one that I've looked at before. I can't really think of any others off the top of my head right now.
Oh, I had to steal it. I'm sorry. Well,
That's fine.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing this with us. It was great to see the conversation in the chat room. So thanks for bringing this up and making it okay to talk about.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank y'all for having me on.
All right, guys, have a great day. And if y'all want, stick around in Mumble or in the IRC room for Linux Unplugged.
Great. That was fantastic. And thank you, Peter, too. Thank you for your contribution. That was also great.
Yeah, wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. I enjoyed all of it. Very, very good. And we'll publish this up on our YouTube channel soon, too, after it goes through.
Yeah. Come out all
So now that we're off air, Chris, I have to ask you, how did you handle me going, you know what, I want to quit and raise goats, I'm done? Let's put you on the spot.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, to me, it seemed understandable. I've been in that position myself, especially when learning a new technology. So I think I was able to pretty well connect with where you were at. So to me, I wasn't too surprised. I understood. And, the thing is like, you really went deep, too, for a while, so I think it's a little more likely to happen when you go as deep. You went not only deep on the tech side, but you went deep on the community side, too. It's understandable, because, we can get really kind of excited about something, and then you just get really overwhelmed at a certain point. I think you made the right call, though. And you could always go back if you wanted to, if you ever change your mind.
There you go. I'm totally going to put you here on the spot and be like, that's a sign of a great manager. When they're like, yeah, I get it. You know what? Do what you need to do. And I wish that there were more organizations that had that kind of openness.
There, just to plug one thing that I kind of spaced on, there is an organization doing some really fantastic work with mental health in the gaming community. It's called Take This. And they do a lot of suicide awareness, depression awareness, stuff like that. But they also trainings on things like crunch time and self-care around the office, and things that impact specifically the gaming company side, which, tons of parallel to the tech world. So that might be something that you might want to put on your radar, because they have a lot of really, really fantastic resources. They also have done a lot of training for managers and companies on how to, increase productivity by not killing your employees, so to say. So definitely check out Take This.
Hey, would you mind DMing that to me, and I'll throw it in the GitHub for other people to be able to look into
Absolutely.
As well? Thank you. All right, Chris, Wes, I think y'all can have your room back then.
All right. I really appreciate it, and I hope some people were tuning in for caught some of that.
Oh, yeah, that was great.
If you were just tuning in and missed the beginning, we will have it up on YouTube, because the entire thing is worth watching. I guess with that, though, we'll begin switching over to the Linux Unplugged mode. Again, Major, thank you very much.
Thank y'all for having me.
And thank you, El.
Yeah.
Thank you, too. I'm really glad that you were able to connect us with Major, because I think that was super valuable. That's another Texas Linux Fest success story right there. I love it. It's that little conference. I tell you what, it really connects people. It's really great. All right. Would you want to play some sort of snazzy transitional music? We'll have to burp the stream a little bit and everything, folks. So don't. And if you're on YouTube, I suppose the stream will be going down for a couple of minutes, right? Because we got to cut files and stuff, and that's the only way YouTube lets you do it.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Technical limitations up
we'll be
there.
back up sooner over at jblive.tv
Oh, yeah, live. Linux Unplugged.
and other streaming outlets near you. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.